Hey, I don't think we actually do during the video, but just a reminder, this channel, we're no longer talking about Webtoon. If you're here for Webtoon, unsubscribe, unsubscribe. Good, good. Alright, I'm gonna go back to editing this video, oh my gosh. Hey everyone! I am back with another interview today with KL Graywill.
Hello, or Kelso. You guys can call me Kelso, that's fine.
Kelso. I'll call you Kelso today. Anyway, I'm excited to talk to you because you have a pretty interesting background in neuroscience, I believe.
Yes, which
Yes.
I can talk about forever, so I can't wait for that section.
Yeah.
I'm KL Graywill. My comic is called 85 Unseen, and my description is: a scientist trying to get her powers back thinks she's found a solution when she crosses paths with a fugitive on a quest to find the stars. Can they find the answers they seek before the Empire finds them? Or worse yet, before the very fabric of time and space unravels? Find out more. Now, I guess.
So, how did you get into art?
I have always been into art. I had a pretty eclectic household. So my mom was, or is, a graphic designer, and my dad works in IT. So I have like art mom, tech dad, and they just exposed my brother and I to all sorts of things when we were kids. And they encouraged us to be creative and experiment with things and learn about stuff. So I was always doing art. Actually, my mom she found some of my old art that she was going through, and she found my first comic ever, which was a Mother's Day card to her, and it's so cute. I think I must have been less than 10. I don't even understand the comic. Like, I don't even know what I was trying to convey in it. She also sent me like some horse girl stories that I had written when I was younger. So I was always writing stories and making art. But around 10 years old is actually when I stopped, because I had a really bad art teacher who she was one of those art teachers that just liked still life and realism, and if you weren't good at that, she wasn't particularly encouraging or like interested. And I was really young too. This is when I was in like 5th grade. So I stopped doing art for a while, kind of because of that. So I was really into it when I was a child, and then around the end of primary school, I had a period where I didn't do a lot of art for a while because of that.
So, what kind of art were you doing before that time period that she disapproved of?
Oh, lots of painting. I think mainly because my mom's art background, before she did graphic design, she studied fine arts, and so she had lots of acrylic paints and watercolors and things lying around the house. So I think I got really into that. I liked doing pencil drawings. I was definitely a horse girl. Like I said, I wrote horse girl stories. I had so many drawings from that movie Spirit, Stallion of the Cimarron. I don't know why I was obsessed with it, but I drew so many horses. That was my biggest obsession as a child. So
you got into creative writing basically at a super early age, which I think I hear every once in a while in comic artists, but I don't think that's very common for like the general public. I mean, like, being imaginative as a young kid is, but it's pretty rare that I hear someone actually focusing on their writing skills. Well, not like the technical stuff, but as a kid.
Yeah, but just like making stories. No, I mean they definitely weren't good. But yeah, around when I was 8 to 9, and then up until around when I was 10, which is kind of when I stopped doing art as much, I was definitely doing kind of both storytelling and art stuff. And the things that my mom had sent me, like my horse girl stories, she was so encouraging, because I had written up my little horse girl stories, a few chapters, and she helped me format it to make it more like a book. And she wrote a little about the author page, and put a little picture of me in it. And she sent me some of these files, and some of these other like physical art things that she had found when she was going through some of my old stuff. And I mean, I'm grateful to have just had parents who were encouraging like that. Just the fact that she encouraged me to keep writing things, and she tried to format it kind of like a little book to make me feel like I was an author, like I had written something. That's not something that everyone gets. So I'm definitely very grateful for my parents' encouragement in various creative endeavors.
Yeah, that certainly does sound like a very special time period. How did you get back into art if you stopped when you were in the fifth grade?
It was honestly through fandom. I kind of had your standard indoctrination into the fantasy genre, like Lord of the Rings, Star Wars, which my dad is he has like a shrine to Star Wars in our house, I swear. And then I got kind of into like Marvel and DC stuff. As I got a little bit older, I got into Teen Titans. I did cosplay of Teen Titans. I got really into Avatar: The Last Airbender. So once I kind of fell into like the fandom rabbit hole, that's kind of what helped me get back into art. So I it's one of those periods I look back on as like, oh, the cringe, the time of cringe. But I'm grateful to it because I got really into character art through that. So I wasn't doing as much like traditional stuff by that point. Because my mom was a graphic designer, she had like the Adobe Creative Suite on her computer, so I could kind of just fiddle around in Photoshop, and that's how I got into doing digital art and character art, which kind of went hand in hand with fandom stuff because I was on Tumblr, so I was looking at people drawing fan art of characters from like Avatar or from anime, so that kind of helped me rekindle the love for drawing.
Yeah, yeah. That was an exciting era of TV to watch, like Teen Titans, Avatar, all the cool action shows going on. It's fun time.
I straddle the border between millennial and Gen Z, so I got kind of the tail end of both of those things. But yeah, some of the like older anime, I guess they're still popular now, but like Bleach was my first anime, and there was a period where I was heavy into Death Note.
Yes.
I think like the newer animes that are more popular with people like when I was their age are more like I know Jujutsu Kaisen is really popular right now. There's the isn't there a there's a volleyball one.
Haikyuu, but that
Yeah, yeah.
that ended. I don't know if the anime's over, but the manga's over.
Definitely Attack on Titan is really popular now. I mean, I got into that even when I was in high school, which was not a decade ago, but it was long enough. But I got really into like Samurai Champloo, one of my favorites, one of my biggest influences. Full Metal Alchemist, which is kind of still a classic, I think, or considered to be a classic. And then my brother and I grew up with Nintendo consoles, so we had a bunch of Legend of Zelda games, which also were like a big influence on me. And I definitely the world building in those stories is something that I think comes through in my own stories. So that was a big influence on me as well. And that kind of helped me get back into art because games and TV shows, those were all they were sources of entertainment. So it was sort of something that I was probably just going to get into by default because I was a teenager or a preteen looking for things to do. And it just happened to be that like the things that I got into were also things that had really strong online fandom presences, I guess. And that helped me get into kind of the fan art community. And my DeviantArt was filled with Bleach, Avatar, Samurai Champloo, some Attack on Titan. I mean, it's kind of nice to have that though as like it's like a time capsule. Sometimes I like to go log back into that just to see what my old art used to look like.
Yeah, yeah. So, were there any other shows or comics or games that influenced you growing up?
I think those were the main ones. Probably Star Wars was like my biggest one when I was really young because that's the one that my dad force fed my brother and I.
Hmm.
And then I had like an Avatar era that kind of overlapped with like my overarching anime phase, which lasted from I don't know age 12 to present, and and Zelda was kind of sprinkled throughout there. So those were kind of my main pieces of influential media, I think, as a comic artist.
How young were you when you knew that you wanted to make a comic?
Well, yeah, I guess I have always made comics. Even when I was just a kid, didn't really I didn't go in with the intention of like, I want to make comics, so I'm gonna make my Mother's Day card for mom a comic or something. It was just like a natural way of storytelling for me because I'm a visual person, and because I enjoy telling stories, it made sense to me to just like use that format a lot. And when I got into digital art when I was younger, I used to make lots of silly little like kind of gag comics, just like one page. Like I remember I made a comic about how I don't like the edge piece of a cake, or like a, you know, like a tray of brownies or something.
Yeah,
If
yeah.
anyone ever gave me an edge piece, I felt like the rage of 1,000 suns fill my whole body. Like, no, give me a middle piece. What is this? And I just made silly little comics about things like that when I was younger. And then eventually there was more of a shift in undergrad where I started making like autobiographical short story comics. One of those is being published right now in an anthology, so a collection, which is about mental health. But I made a bunch of those in undergrad. I wrote little autobiographical short stories about my fraught relationship with my appearance and my hair. I made one. I made one kind of during the peak of like the refugee crisis because I had worked in humanitarian aid. So I made a comic about my experiences with that. I made a comic about my experiences with my own sort of personal mental afflictions. So I started using it as a medium to share things about myself with other people. And it just happens that one of them fit really well into this mental health anthology that's being put together by Penn State University Press. So I have one that I'll be able to say is like formally published, but a lot of them were just things that I made because I wanted to share pieces about my life and my experiences with various things with other people. I made things about my family and about being a student and, you know, all sorts of just like personal topics, but they were always very short form things and ways for me to just talk about things that happened in my life that I wanted to be able to communicate with people. And it just made sense for me to do that in like a visual storytelling format because that's what I was good at. I never thought though that I would do like a long form fantasy epic. Absolutely not. So on one hand, it's like, did I always know when I was young that I wanted to do comics? In a way, yes. I always knew that I would make comics because I just was making them. It was never really like a precedent that I set for myself. I just wanted to make them. I had things to say. So I was going to say and draw them. But I never really thought like when I was younger, oh, one day I'm going to make a graphic novel and it's going to be this, you know, insane long-term high fantasy type thing. In that way, I didn't always know that I was going to do something like this, something like what I'm doing with Webtoon. But I think like many people in the global padonkadonk, we have more time for things, you know, especially early on. I mean, I know things are a little bit more, people like to believe that maybe they're a little bit more now, and life is kind of, and work is returning a little bit to its former state. But early on, like late 2020, I was like, this is probably the best time for me to do something like this. And it might be one of the only times where I have this much like time and energy to create this story. So I am in that way kind of grateful for lockdown because I wouldn't have done this otherwise probably.
Could we talk about a little bit more transitioning from working on what sounds like mainly like small autobiographical pieces more towards fantasy? Because I'm curious how you made that jump.
I mean, it definitely was a jump. It wasn't really a gradual thing for me, I don't think, because what I was doing in undergrad and kind of leading up to that through high school was I was really interested in medical humanities, and in undergrad I also studied the sciences. Like I wasn't an art student, so I was always really interested in how we could use um, humanities and the arts to communicate things in science. And a lot of what I did in undergrad was kind of centered around like talking about things like mental illness or talking about things like healthcare or humanitarian crises in a really digestible medium like comics. So there was definitely a jump from doing that kind of work. I mean, they were autobiographical, they were personal, but a lot of them I was discussing things which were, you know, topical to the kind of stuff that I did in my work life, that things that were related to health or to humanitarian aid or something like I mentioned before. So then there's a big jump from that to doing a fantasy comic series. And I think that jump was made possible by all the previous years that I had as a child, just consuming all of this media and loving fiction and anime and video games, that it was kind of this thing that I had always wanted to do with my storytelling and my comics, but there was never a reason to. And the reason that I had to make the comics before was, you know, it was related to my work. It was a way for me to like express things in my life, people, but I never felt like I had a good enough reason before to do kind of this completely unrelated, you know, like I can't there's not really a line in my resume where I can like talk about how making this sci-fi fantasy webcomic is useful to like me as a medical school applicant or as a cognitive science researcher, because it's like I can try to justify it, but it's a stretch, because really me making that fantasy webtoon is, you know, it's not necessarily related to what I was doing before. There is kind of a jump there, and I think that's okay. I wanted the chance to tell a story that I've always wanted to tell without feeling like it needed to have some kind of relationship to my other academic work. People who are really creative and like to do lots of things and have many ideas feel kind of forced by our current society to justify why they want to do those things, because everything that you do needs to have some kind of thread to like why it's worth you doing it. Like you can't just do something because it's interesting to you and it's something that you want to do. There needs to be some kind of way to justify how much time you spent on it, how much energy or money even that you put into a certain hobby. And I think some people are okay with just having hobbies maybe, but for those of us that are in situations where we feel like we're constantly trying to I don't know, pave our way, there is kind of a feeling that like you do have to in a way justify everything that you're doing, or you're wasting your time, especially when you're working on something. At least for me, I spend probably close to 30 hours working on this comic sometimes, and not just on the comic itself, but also because I have a YouTube channel. I do lots of promotion on TikTok. Like I spend a lot of time making other promotional content for the comic. So if you tack that on to how much time I spend on the comic itself, it's I mean, I definitely am spending enough time on it that it would be classed as a part-time job easily. I'm sure many other comic artists spend similar amounts of time working on their comic and also trying to promote it on social media and whatever. So, you know, it's hard, not just for other people, but I think we also feel the need to justify it to ourselves, that there has to be some way of like, you know, well, we did this comic, but at least now we can say to future employers that we, you know, ran a successful web series that had, you know, XYZ amount of subscribers and views, and we gained these skills in doing that, and it had this specific relationship to our main work or to that job that we're applying for or something. I think there's a lot of pressure to do that from outside sources and that we put on ourselves.
Yeah. And I think with posting on social media, there's certainly the sentiment that, like, oh, if you're not going to put in your absolute maximum amount of hours, the next guy behind you will, and they'll pass you up.
Yeah, definitely. And that's one of the things I had to let go of a little bit, because I felt like if I'm going to do this, if I'm going to make this webcomic, I need to put in as much energy as humanly possible. Like because I'm not capable of doing anything at like 50%, I have to do it at like 200%.
Yeah, yeah.
When I made the webcomic, I didn't just make the webcomic. I was like, okay, it's also time to start like a world building and storytelling YouTube, and also like gain a bunch of followers on TikTok, and make sure that I have like multiple Instagram accounts for like the comics and for other forms of art that I do on the internet. It was like it turned into this whole other thing, and I had to kind of let go of some of the external social media stuff, because it was taking so much time, and I felt so much pressure to keep up with it and to be posting things at a normal schedule, not only in the webcomic, but like uploading videos regularly, or making sure that I have posts queued for whatever other social media platforms, because it's true that there of course is going to be someone who is willing to do that if you're not. And I felt like I had put a lot of pressure on myself to perform to that standard, because I felt like if I wasn't doing as much as I possibly could, I was doing a disservice to my webcomic by not like putting it out there as much as I possibly could, or trying to grow a following. And maybe I am doing it a little bit of a disservice by taking a step back from some of those things, but a lot of growth kind of is one of those things that comes over time. So I tried to step away a little bit from that thinking and just like work on the comic because that's what I want to work on, and tell that story because that's the story that I want to tell, and that's all that matters. And focus on the social media stuff as a secondary thing, and try not to get too hyper focused on like, you won't grow if you don't post XYZ on ABC sites 3 to 4 times a day, 5 to 4 times a month, like, because it just gets insane.
Yeah, yeah. It's hard, especially to I've kind of run into the problem, and that's why I took a YouTube hiatus for a while, that like sometimes through just sheer will, I can maintain doing a crazy thing for several months, and it just starts to feel like normal, until I eventually suddenly start to completely fall apart, and then I realize that it's definitely not something that I can maintain doing. I just did it through like sheer will, you know?
Just through the power of adrenaline.
Just through the power, yeah, yeah. I guess
You just kind of you get into you almost like a comfortable, I don't know, horrible content creation schedule where you normalize it for yourself, and you get into the flow of it. It's like being in the zone. I was doing that for a little bit when I first launched the comic. I was doing the weekly updates, and then I was like forcing myself to post on TikTok like 3 times a day, and make a really high quality YouTube video for every week on something really in depth too, not something that I can even just like, because a lot of the reason that people follow me on social media is for world building stuff, and not necessarily just like because they like my art. So it didn't usually cut it if I just posted a time lapse or something of my art, and that's it. I usually had to put a lot of effort also into like making a script and talking really in depth about like languages or about maps. The whole idea of having to like maintain this really rigorous posting schedule on social media outside of your actual comic alone, which is what we all want to actually be working on. I think it became really detrimental to me anyway. I definitely felt it when I had been working exclusively on webcomic stuff for like 3 months, and I was just posting the weekly chapters, and I was doing very involved weekly YouTube videos, and then also, you know, the daily TikToks and Instagram posts and posting on Reddit, whatever other social, Pinterest, all of the social media sites possible. And by the end of like 3 months or so, my friends were like, "Where are you? You have become a recluse, and you're not doing anything with us." And I was like, "Oh, you're right. I'm not." And I'm the kind of person that can get into one of those dates and really not be bothered by it. Like, I am fine being isolated for long periods of time if I have something to work on. My flatmate always makes fun of me for never getting bored, because I think most people experience boredom in the sense like sometimes you just don't want to do things and you're just bored. But I'm never bored. There's always something that I want to be working on. There's always an idea that I want to be working on, or a thing that I want to be doing, or even if I don't want to be doing something, there's always something that something that I want to be consuming, whether that's media or like actual food. I tend to not really get bored. I just have lots of ideas for things that I want to work on, and I will sit in a trance for months at a time working on those things without really paying attention to like what's going on in the world around me. And that can be really dangerous when you're an independent creator and you already hold yourself to a really high standard of content production. So I got very deep into that for a while, and then, you know, realized that it wasn't great for like my quality of life, like my work-life balance, to be trying to produce at that rate. So I had to step back from that a little bit. In my free time that I was part of organizing art community events for people, and I used to teach painting classes at a bar that we had on campus, you know, like the kind where you just like sip wine and you imitate like a painting that someone's doing at the front. Yeah, it was like that kind of setup. So it was, you know, it was just fun and it was nice. And I got to meet all kinds of people. And yeah, that was one of the best things about undergrad for me, was honestly like being part of the art community. And we did all sorts of really cool like mural projects and installations on campus and running the arts festival. So I loved that. That was such a beautiful time in the arts for me. And because it wasn't academic, it wasn't like I was worried about needing a homework deadline or like forcing myself to be creative for a grade, because everything that I was doing was just to be part of the community, to bring art to other people, to like teach classes or host exhibitions. So I was very lucky in that sense that a lot of my relationship with art during that period was something that I sought out rather than, you know, being forced to like, oh, I really have to draw something for this assignment for an art class. So I really benefited from that, I think. And I did so much too in the art community that when I graduated, my university named an award after me. So at my university now, there's an award called the Graywill Award for Arts Leadership and Service. And one or two seniors at my university at Duke can win that award, and they endowed it. So, you know, anyone after me now can actually be awarded money for serving the arts community in that specific way. They can come from any major background. They can be an engineer. They can be an art student. They can come from whatever background, it doesn't matter. But as long as they contributed something to the art community, being a leader in it, they can potentially win that award. So that's one of the things that I'm by far most proud of, that kind of came from me being really involved in that community. And that was kind of the first part. And the second part is I had also kind of an academic relationship with art because I studied neuroesthetics, which is sort of like it's a sub-discipline of neuroscience, right? Which we've mentioned before. So neuroesthetics is kind of like the part of neuroscience that's concerned with how people perceive and create art. So academically, I did study art a little bit, but it was like the philosophy of art, or it was the neuroscience of art. It was never like, I was never taking like painting classes or design classes or something. So I never really had a situation where I was forcing myself to create some kind of creative product for a grade. If I was studying art, it was like through my kind of neuroaesthetics lens, but I never really had to force myself to produce creative works for other people or for grades or for a job or anything. I mean, I did work some like side hustles. Like I worked doing graphic design on campus for a while, which was solidified for me that I never wanted to be a freelance artist because I did not like having to produce work for clients. I hate it so much. Not that there's anything wrong with clients, but more that it takes the love out of the art for me in a lot of ways, unless it's like a commission for someone whose vision really resonates with me, or they give me creative power to like they trust my vision and they say, here, paint me something, here's kind of like some things that I like, and I trust you to make something. And that's definitely happened before. People have commissioned me to do paintings like that, which is great, but doing freelance art in a more like a business setting where you're working with a client, going back and forth over a design and doing revisions and all of that just was like very soul sucking for me. I think for a lot of people too. Like, you know, I don't think that's anyone's really ideal way of doing art, but you know, I was lucky to. I did that sometimes as a way to earn income, but a lot of the art that I got to produce during those years of my life was things that I did for myself and things that I wanted to do. So I had a really great relationship with art in that sense because it was very kind of extrinsic, or not extrinsic, it was intrinsic. I didn't have any, yeah, it's literally the opposite of what I was saying. But I didn't have any external forces that were like, you need to make this kind of thing, you need to produce this kind of art, you need to use this technique or this medium or whatever. I could just make what I wanted to make. And it happened that I made a lot of things that were discussions or commentary or something on issues that other people did care about. So there was like relevance to the work. But, you know, I also produced plenty of things that had no relevance to anything. I did a series like my last year of undergrad. I did like 30 charcoal portraits of my friends, which had, you know, like no, there was no reason for me to do this. It wasn't to raise awareness for anything. It wasn't like grade that I was getting for a project. I just wanted to draw a bunch of my friends and I wanted to do charcoal portraits. So I just made a series of them. So I was very lucky in the sense that a lot of the art that I got to do was, yeah, it was stuff that I got to do for myself.
So why don't we talk a little bit more about your background in neuroscience?
Yes. The can of worms has been opened. Okay. I've given a little tidbit of like neuroaesthetics and what that is. So let me more fully explain that. When I went into undergrad, my advisor was like, okay, what do you want to study? And I was like, I like languages and I like the brain and I want to be pre-med and I also like art. Like I listed off all of these subjects that I was interested in, and she was like, okay, so what kind of intellectual inquiry are you interested in? If you can't pick a subject, can you at least tell me like what kind of questions do you want to answer? And I was like, I want to know what it means to be human, which is right, like the broadest, the single question that all of humanity has been asking itself since we were like sentient creatures. And my advisor was like, okay, great. That also doesn't help us. But my university, Duke, and there were some other universities that do this as well. They have programs where you can propose your own major, which is what I did. So you have to go through this whole process of creating a proposal. You have to get faculty sponsors. You have to like propose it to a committee of faculty in the arts and sciences. And you have to create like a course rationale, pick all these different programs from different departments that are going to be incorporated into it. So it was like a whole process. I got rejected the first time that I did it, and then reapplied and had it approved when I was a sophomore. Yeah. And it was like one of the most exciting things that happened to me in undergrad, because it meant that I was going to get to major in neuroesthetics. So I had classes in my program from over 13 different departments that spanned anthropology, like biology, neuroscience, dance, linguistics, music, philosophy. I mean, it was the most interesting thing to me. And that's because neuroscience is kind of about what consciousness is and perception and how that works. And neuroaesthetics is really interested in what are the conscious experiences of the sublime. Like, what could be more interesting than understanding from a biological, a neuroscientific perspective, what it is that makes us feel something when you're at an orchestra concert and you hear that like last chord progression and the music crescendos and you get chills in your whole body, or when you look at a sunset and it's so beautiful that you have to take a picture of it for Instagram. That's kind of what is at the center of that subdiscipline. It wants to know, what is it about these things in our environment? What gives them so much meaning? Like, what is it about the stimulus itself? Is it the way that it's organized, or the features of it, or is there something about the context that it carries, or who's created it, or who's perceiving it, that makes it so special that humans have been making art since we were cavemen drawing on walls and telling stories since we knew how to make fires and sat around campfires. And that's kind of like the birth of storytelling. And all we have to look back on from those periods from early human ancestors are the drawings they left behind and the tools that they made, a lot of which had these kind of like unnecessary artistic pieces to them, like ornamental designs. And it's one of those things that humans have been doing for a very long time, have been adding these unnecessary or like non-utilitarian artistic touches to things. And this is really fascinating to me, because it's like, that's one of those things that separates humans from other forms of organisms. Like even animals that create art, songbirds, there are some species which discriminate their mates based on their physical appearance, like peacocks. So there are traces of beauty and appreciation of beauty in other species. But to me, I was always really interested in like, well, what makes us human? And I think a lot of that has to do with how we find beauty in the world. So I kind of centered my studies around that. So that's what I did for undergrad. And then my master's was also in the same subject, in neuroaesthetics, which there's only one university in the world currently that has like a degree granting program on neuroaesthetics, and it's University of London Goldsmiths College, which is how I ended up in the UK. And that's what I did for my master's as well. So I think it's just like one of the most interesting kind of emerging disciplines that we can study right now. And it's one of those things that requires a lot of crosstalk between artists and scientists. And I'm lucky to be situated in a position where I can do both. So I can create kinds of art that allow us to study the science aspects better, but I can also design science or like experiments and research that incorporate art in a meaningful kind of like objective, in air quotes, scientific way. So it's cool to be part of a field where I do have to use, and it's very beneficial that I come from a background in both.
You're your discussion earlier about the caveman thing got me thinking about like almost like the eternal struggle of doing art as a career. Because when you think about it, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense, like up front, that someone would want to invest a whole lot of time doing art when they could be doing other things for survival. So it's interesting that that trait started appearing in humans to begin with. But we still face that dilemma now with
For
outside
sure.
pressure of people who
Yeah.
enjoy art, but they don't want it to be made. So,
Yeah. No, it's really like it is the controversy of the species because it is something that scholars still debate the origins of creativity and of not but creativity can be applied to so many things, but a lot of scholars still debate kind of the origin of like art making in that kind of specific sense of creativity, like what was the utility of it, why did humans evolve to do this. And there are a few different kind of schools of thought there, right? So some scholars think that the origins of aesthetic appreciation or of art making, it's like an offshoot of mating selectivity, right? So Darwin had this theory of like mate choice that shaped the animal world, and there are a lot of scholars in neuroaesthetics who believe that mate selection and the ability to like discriminate different kinds of like aesthetic features is something that's like the foundation for where our appreciation for beauty came from. That just being able to like develop um the cognitive skills to differentiate between really small differences in color or in form or something that would make one mate more suitable than the other, which is like something that a lot of species of animals do, not just birds like peacocks, but there are fish that do that. There are some other mammals that do it. It's so there are some people that kind of rely more on that. There are some people that think that, oh, art was an indicator of fitness in a sense of like, if you were in an early human society and you were able to make art, that means that you would have like been high enough up in society that you weren't doing like those basic survival things, that you weren't foraging for food or taking care of a baby or something. So if you were able to make art, then you had enough status and privilege in whatever community that was, that you had enough spare time or resources to make it. And so that trait would be favorable or passed on because it would be an indicator of status essentially.
mm,
So there are people that think it's, kind of an offshoot of that. And then you have people like Steven Pinker, who is kind of a very popular pop science author at this point. But I mean, he has a pretty solid like background in actual academia, not just like writing pop science books. But he believes that and has this like famous line about how music is like cheesecake, that it's there is no utility to it, there is no purpose. It just happens that like we've developed these really specific like cognitive functions or anatomy that allows us to discriminate between different tones or to see different colors in this way. And it's sort of just our like brain's preference that when these things are depicted in an orderly kind of coherent way, that's pleasurable to the brain. So there are lots of different theories circulating, a mix of those things and some other things that I haven't discussed about like where did art come from, like why did people start making it, why was it a trait, or why was art making a thing that we continue to select for. But I think people now, especially with lockdown and so many people being forced into situations where their only source of pleasure and living in the world, it was like playing video games,
mm.
making art, consuming other people's art, or television or something. that people were forced to kind of confront the idea of like, wow, there really isn't anything worth living for except these things. And before, we were just living for work or to socialize, which is also obviously important. But even though art doesn't have the same kind of like obvious utilitarian features of, you know, maybe like being an athlete or but even then, you know, athleticism is in a lot of ways very much related to entertainment in modern society. So I think people are becoming more like comfortable with this idea that, oh yeah, we should value these things, because if we took them out of the equation, this would not be a great place to exist, living on this burning earth, and there's nothing to do except work for like your corporate hellscape. Just exist there and then go to sleep when you get home, and maybe talk to some people. You know, like I think people are realizing a little bit more now that the things that artists produce are what going to concerts and being able to make art with people, or being able to go to galleries and watch or observe other people's art. Those are all things that we kind of weren't able to do because of the pedonkadonk. And I don't know how YouTube demonetized. Like, I don't know how any of that works, so I'm just gonna keep calling it pedonkadonk.
Yeah, YouTube is wild with that.
I know people have been calling it like panini, but I know also that some algorithms have become sophisticated enough that like if they ban a certain word, that also the variations of it that crop up also become flagged. So it's like you have to like create a new iteration of it.
Yeah.
I think Donk should be the new one. And then when eventually the algorithm is like, oh, that's the new code word for it, huh? Then we'll have to think of something else. But yeah, but I mean, I think it forced people to like to grapple with that, because they realized, oh, all of these things that we miss so much, this is all stuff that artists do. And also the things that were our relief during all of this were also they were all things that artists do. I think a lot of people found relief in playing video games and reading webcomics and watching TV series, being on Netflix all the time during lockdown. So it's, I think people are slowly kind of like understanding that just because it's not explicitly utilitarian, just because it's not like an essential service, doesn't mean that it's non-essential. So I'm grateful that people are having more discussions about that now, because it's true that for basically since the beginning of time, people have been questioning, what is the value of art? Why do we make it? Why is it important? And it's continued to stump people, because a lot of evolutionary anthropologists and evolutionary psychologists were approaching it from a very utilitarian perspective. Like, what benefit does this provide that would allow this to be passed on? But art is kind of transcendent of those kinds of things, and I think that's what makes it really interesting to study, and to study why we like art so much, and not just art as like an institution, but even people who don't like art like art.
Yeah.
Even people who are like, oh, I don't have a creative bone in my body, they probably still have a favorite song that they listen to. They probably still have a favorite TV series that they watch, or maybe they've appreciated like a cityscape once and took a picture of it, like I said, like for their Instagram or something. Those are like everyday kind of like mundane practices of appreciating beauty that everyone experiences, even if they're not necessarily creative types. So I think it's a really fascinating topic, and definitely one that I hope more young people will decide to study that kind of intersection, something interdisciplinary like that.
It is just so nice and satisfying to see different fields come together. And I notice that a lot when working on a comic. You have to know a lot of random stuff.
Oh, for sure. Like comics, especially, you have to understand it's not just about art or even just about art and writing. You have to understand design, and you have to think about language and communication, and that's just within comics. But yeah, it's really cool. It's cool to see kind of labels being created for these interdisciplinary kind of fields. And the thing too is that a lot of our ideas of disciplines are they're it's just constructs.
Mm.
There's not like a barrier separating science from art. They're just two different ways of observing and interpreting reality. And even neuroscience as a discipline, that wasn't a thing until like 1960. So before that, neuroscience was biology and psychology, and eventually evolved into neuroscience, which is now, treated as its own fully like standalone discipline. But a lot of our ideas of disciplines and what separates them, those came from, academic institutions that have existed for like 100 or so years, and they haven't really changed since then. So there's a lot to be said, I think, for these kind of like more niche, like interdisciplinary fields that people are becoming interested in, because I think that a lot of these are they're very natural paths of inquiry. I think it's very natural to like want to study, aesthetics and the appreciation of beauty and the brain. But the way that our disciplines are structured makes it seem like that's like a super niche thing. But so is like behavioral economics, right? Is also like a niche discipline. But that's also, I think, a very kind of like that discipline makes a lot of sense to me, thinking about how people take risks and like how behavior is kind of related to like economic theory. So the program that I did at my university, where we could create our own majors, there were only 12 of us that graduated with one of those self-designed majors or degrees. We didn't call them majors, just
Yeah.
as like a trendy thing. They were like, no, they're not majors, they're something else. It's not a major, it's a question. Which I think is kind of cool. Like I interviewed it with a podcast when I was like a senior or something that was talking about how academics are kind of like looking more toward these interdisciplinary fields as the solution to problems that we have now. That's kind of the future or whatever. And it's like, yeah, I think it would be really cool if we lived in a world where students didn't major in something, they like majored in a question, and you got to kind of pick what question you wanted to answer at the beginning of college. And then, I know that's like, I'm on some new age type ish with that, but I think that would be so great.
Yeah.
But yeah, there were 12 of us who graduated from that program my year, and there was someone who was studying behavioral economics, there was someone who was doing like data science and journalism, like all kinds of really cool, really fascinating intersections that were in a lot of cases not just like, breaking the boundaries within sciences, because sure, there are some people that are studying like engineering and also neuroscience, and they're doing neuroengineering or whatever, but a lot of these cases, like data science and journalism, are very different, but you can tell immediately just from pairing those phrases together how in this current day and age that would be very relevant to study like data mining and journalism and maybe like clickbait and misinformation. Like there's so many relevant um, things that I feel like just saying those two words together, people are like, oh yeah, that's really cool. I can see how that would be super interesting and relevant. So I hope that there are more opportunities for young people to study those kinds of things. And that's one thing that America actually does very well that I have to give it credit for. Because in the UK, people, like a lot of my friends that studied in this master's course with me, they were very restricted in terms of what they studied when they were in undergrad. But in the US, you know, people are free to like kind of liberal arts education in the US encourages people to like, or it sometimes requires them. You still have to take languages, or you have to take core curriculum that everyone takes regardless of their major. We had stuff like that as well in undergrad. I mean, I think that is really important too. I think it's important to be well-rounded in your education. And I think that if anyone tells you that you can't study the things that you want, or that you have to just like pick one thing, don't listen to them because it's a lie. And I let people tell me for a very long time that I would have to pick between, you know, doing science or doing art, especially as someone that is going into medicine, that I would have to like let go of other things that I was interested in. Instead of you know, imagining the possibility that, hey, maybe some of these things actually can talk to each other, and that it's actually good to have a background that spans all of these different kinds of disciplines, because it helps you, and it shouldn't be something that you just like force people to toss aside. Because in a lot of cases, having a background that spans multiple disciplines and being very good at what you do, not, you know, just having like a superficial knowledge of each of those things, but actually having like a really in-depth knowledge of your interests, and how they are connected, is super beneficial. And I think that people are going to see more and more that they are rewarded for pursuing what they love, and studying multiple things, and pursuing many interests, and showing people the connections between them, and how that can improve our lives and improve our understanding of ourselves. And I hope that more people will choose to pursue that route. And so if you're listening and you're torn between multiple subjects, I mean, some people just want to study things separately. Like some people legit, I know, just want to study neuroscience and study art separately. They're not interested in like putting them together. But if you are, you can do that. There are avenues, there are institutions that support that. So if anyone listening is kind of at that crossroads where they have to like make decisions about, what will I major in? What things that I love will I sacrifice so that I can conform to the model that society has forced on me? You don't have to do it. You don't have to.
Yeah. And this whole conversation sort of has me thinking about like, actually, I think just like 2 days ago, I was watching this like video about how behavioral economics ties in with like marketing, and sort of this idea that like people want to assign humans this like really straightforward, almost like linear mathematical behavior, but we all know that we're not actually like that. And that's what sort of like makes humans special. So when you think about too, like when it comes to like computers and computer science, I think that in the long run, those who become curious about how to grasp these complex patterns that somehow humans seem to be able to get right now, but computers are like way far behind on, I think those are the people that are really going to thrive in the future, you know?
Oh, absolutely. Especially, I think there are a lot of artists that are scared of technology, and not just artists too, but there's technology. There's threats that technology will replace all of us. The robots will replace us. There were students in my master's course who looked at AI art, like in particular, and I think that that's really an interesting and an area that I want to see people embrace, because when digital art became a thing, and it became accessible to the masses rather.
Mm.
People were, and people still are like this, saying, "Oh, digital art it's you're cheating. This isn't real art." Just the same way that people, when AIs start actually becoming like a tool that people can use to create art, people will also think, "Oh, this is like cheating or something." But the reality is that the tools that we have to create art are going to constantly advance. And I hope that people will choose to embrace those things, because what it does is it allows it by giving the job of like rendering or posing, or whatever kind of digital art hack you might have, using a brush or an asset or something from Clip Studio, like whatever tool you have to make your job easier, there will be technology introduced later on that makes the job that you're still doing now, even with those tools, also easier, which means that we can continue to like ascend to this like higher order art. But
Yeah.
that's it's good, because it means that we get to spend more time thinking about like the meaning of the art, its impact, like what it's trying to communicate, and less time on like technical things, because we will eventually create so many tools that the technical aspects of art are not exclusive to human capability anymore, that it can be produced by a machine. And I know that that's really weird and uncomfortable for people, but I think it's also very interesting. I don't think it diminishes the quality of technical skill either, because there will always be a place for traditionally made art, for crafts. And there's still a lot of value just like in having like a handmade crafted piece of art. So I don't think that will ever go away, but there's so much that we can't even comprehend that technology will give to us in terms of being able to create things. And I am excited to see where that goes in our lifetime, because I'm sure that in our lifetime alone, we will continue to see more advancements in like, just how far can technology go in creating human-like art, right? And from the studies that I watched my peers create for their dissertations on that, they're already at a point where AIs can create art that's basically indistinguishable from human art. And the only way that we have of discriminating against them is knowing that it was created by an AI. But if you just present people images that were somewhere made by an AI, somewhere made by like humans, people don't even know. People don't even know. So it's that's another intersection. I don't study AI at all. That's like not even part of what I study, but I still think that's super interesting. And I know that there was another student that did something related to like AI. I don't think in art, but in something else. So, embrace the new, embrace the robots.
Yeah. I guess like hearing you talk about that and then thinking about that again, because it used to be scary for me too for a while, but then now as a comic artist, I'm like, yeah, make me draw less. But I guess the actual scary thing when I really think about it is when you're not spending all of your time like actually working and making stuff, then you really have to face that question of like, who am I? What makes us human? What is there left for me to do? I think that's the scary part, really.
That's what we love, right? We love that. we're human. All of humans' work has just slowly been developing enough technology so that we can exclusively dedicate our time to existential dread.
Honestly, though, yeah.
Sometimes deluding ourselves with like other frivolous things, and like trying to earn lots of money so that we can immerse ourselves in those frivolous things, but still at the end of the day, pushing the limits of innovation to the point that eventually we could have technology available to us that can take care of like basically all of our our needs, and can also do a large portion of our like kind of higher level cognitive work as well, in terms of like being able to do the jobs of like everyone. So it's scary, but you know, it's that I welcome it, because that's what I said I wanted, right? I said when I talked to my advisor that I wanted to understand what makes us human. So if you can get me there faster by allowing robots to do everything for us so that I can spend, you know, and also create some kind of technology that allows me to not sleep, then I can spend all of my time just pondering the meaning of the universe. Sounds great.
Yeah. And I'll just do what I normally do, which is sit around reading comics so I can avoid that question.
And also at the same time make comics that address the question, but force the readers to answer it for themselves.
It looks like next up on our list is discussing research on creativity and being able to empathize with fiction.
Yes. So I will preface this by saying that I do have an entire video on my channel about this if you really want to like listen to me talk for half an hour, which I will probably still do anyway in the interview.
Everyone be sure to go check that out. Yeah.
There's a video on my channel where I talk about this specifically. But yeah, my research specifically for my master's dissertation was on pain. And if we're looking at images of pain, how does that image of pain? So usually it usually would be someone in physical pain. How does our perception of that image change if it's presented as like a photorealistic stimuli versus an artistic one? So I was interested mainly to see if people could find painful images more beautiful, or if they could empathize more with them depending on how it was rendered. So even if all the qualities of the stimuli were held constant in terms of like what kind of pain the person was in who was in the image, you know, how it was shown, how it was framed, what the composition of the piece was, if you kept all of those constant and you just changed if you just tweaked it so that one of the renderings looks like a painting, how does that change people's willingness to like to consume that image? And does it make them like the image more? Does it make them find it more beautiful? And then how do they empathize with it? And then I also do a lot of research on specific kinds of empathy. Like, you know, it's kind of a buzzword that gets thrown around a lot in scientific and pop sci stuff, especially because it's a bit nebulous, right? Like, what is empathy? Is it understanding how someone else feels, or is it sharing that feeling with them when you see them experiencing whatever they're experiencing? Or is it the thing that motivates you to alleviate suffering? And those are actually all three different discrete kinds of empathy that researchers talk about. And because, you know, the way science works is through controlling certain variables and making slight changes to measure differences, scientists have to talk about empathy as kind of like this entire cloud of different concepts. So if you're interested more in like the nitty gritty of empathy and the terminology, I would recommend listening to my video about it, because I talk about that a bit more in depth. But basically what I wanted to explore with my research was, how does the context, or like the perceived context of a stimulus, how does that change how people are able to relate to a depiction of something that's inherently negative, like pain? And the reason that I was interested in this is it goes all the way back to our philosophy lad, Aristotle, who asked, why do people go in droves, in masses? Why to go see Greek tragedies performed. You know, like why would people want to go watch a performance of human suffering where people are accurately depicting human suffering? Why would they want to go watch that? That sounds that doesn't sound super fun. That sounds super sad. So Aristotle was like, that's super sad. Why would we do that? And he called this the paradox of tragic pleasure, which is basically something that philosophers have been asking about ever since, and that neuroscientists today are also interested in, because it's like, why do we do this? Why do we go to watch a horror film with our friend in the cinema and, you know, give ourselves a heart attack? And why do we listen to sad music when someone dumps us? Like, why would we do things that are, you know, basically engaging with negative stimuli? Why do we go to art museums to look at Picasso's depressing paintings about war? Like, this is literally what we do with our free time. Humans love this stuff. And this is what inspired all of these concepts like catharsis and mimesis, are all really related to how we are able to like mirror our own experiences in the experiences of others and in creative works that others produce. And so what Aristotle thought was, well, you know, if they go to see a Greek tragedy performed, they get to experience this whole part of like the emotional spectrum that we usually avoid completely. Like in our regular lives, we're like suffering, heartbreak, sadness, anxiety. No, thank you, sir. Please get that away from me. But if it's in a situation like you're watching it be performed in a television show or something, you don't actually have you don't have to worry about the real life consequences of those things, but you still get to kind of like mirror the actual kind of emotional part of it. So his idea was that it kind of art gives us space to experience all of these negative things without having to actually hold the consequences to those things ourselves in our real life. And I think that is very true for most art forms. Like when I watch The Office and I get sad because Jim and Pam won't get together, like, or because like Jim got a new girlfriend, but what about Pam? But I don't actually have to experience like being in that situation and like confessing my feelings for someone and then getting like shot down because they're engaged or whatever. But I get to watch them experience it, and I kind of get to simulate all of those emotions and go through all of that with them without actually having to like deal with that in my real life. And I think that's why people get so deep into fandom culture, because these stories give us this like playground kind of to experience all of this drama and the conflict and the tension and all of this like really, you know, these very compelling negative emotions that are so compelling that they cause people to like start wars or go on big adventures and do all this like grandiose stuff, and we actually kind of get to experience that with them. And a lot of it goes back to another kind of buzzwordy topic in the field right now, which is about mirror neurons. So you know, I won't get into like the anatomy of mirror neurons or really like how the mirror neuron system works, but mirroring is a thing, and it is very much true that like if you watch someone trip and fall on the pavement while they're running to catch the bus, you know, there's a part in your brain that while you watch their knee like skid on the pavement and get cut open or something, like your brain will mirror the same kind of like motor actions that person is taking. And this has been studied a lot in monkeys in particular, and in humans, where even if you're watching someone else perform an action in certain cases, like your brain does mimic on a neural level what their brain is doing, even though you're not actually doing that action. So there's a lot to be said, I think, for, you know, the idea of like stories give us this space to kind of to take on all of the things that we put our characters through and experience those things with them without actually having to, you know, experience those things with them, which is great because, you know, I don't want to experience all the things that my characters experience. They're going to go through they're going to have so many traumatic experiences. I don't want that. But I get to go through this whole process with them of the elation and the tragedy that comes with everything in the story. So that's kind of why I wanted to pursue that research in particular. And the research project that I'm working on right now, which probably by the time the interview is posted will be done, so I don't feel bad talking about it, because we're collecting data for it right now, but it's about comics specifically, and we are looking at basically we have two different comic strips, which I made both of them. It's a short story just about having a childhood friend growing apart and then coming back together. So it's this kind of like universal thing. A lot of people, I think, can relate to growing away from your childhood friends, and that's kind of an experience that we were hoping a lot of people would be able to relate to. And both the comics, it's the same exact story, same characters, same names. The narration is the same in both of them, but one of them, the characters are kind of like these amorphous little blob things, and then in the other comic, I drew them as more realistic humans. So what we're trying to see is like, you know, to what extent does the abstraction of characters in comics also maybe assist people in projecting themselves onto those characters and to those character situations, and also how does if there's a likeness shared between the viewer or the reader and the character, how does that impact their ability to relate to that character? Because what we found in my dissertation study was that in images of pain where you could see the person's face, that people actually empathized with those less, which was kind of an unusual finding. Because I was thinking that showing the facial expression would give a good indicator as to how much pain the person was in, so that that would make them more empathetic, because it would tell them more about like how painful this is for that person. But it was actually the opposite, and we think it has to do with this idea of intentional empathetic projection, which is like a term. But I mean, essentially, projection, it kind of self-explanatory. Like the idea that if the less you know about the identity of the person in the depiction, the more able you are to kind of put yourself into their shoes. So that was part of what inspired the new research that we're working on. But it's really cool because we're actually working specifically with a comic format for this. But yeah, I mean, if anyone is particularly interested in my dissertation research, there's a link on my channel as well to I have an interactive kind of like a hybrid comic / narrative of my dissertation research that you can read on my website, and it kind of like breaks down everything. So I don't know if that's of interest to people. I know it can be kind of intimidating if you don't know anything about like the terminology or the things in the discipline. That's why I made like an interactive version of it online for people that are kind of like, oh yeah, this is really cool, and I can see how this is relevant to maybe what I'm doing or something. Then I want people to be able to benefit from the findings of the research without necessarily like having to, you know, have the same degree of like science literacy that someone with a master's in the topic does. So that's online if anyone's interested.
What do you think creatives should know about the brain?
Okay, so all right, I've given I think hopefully plenty of foundation here for like my background and my perspectives on this, right? So from my perspective, there are two things that I think I would want other people watching this, like other webtoon creators, to know about cognition and how you can use that in your own storytelling. Okay, so the first thing is cognition refers to a process. Cognition is the process of learning, like understanding new information, right? And our cognition is built around two things. The first thing is exposure or familiarity. So how much you are exposed to a certain kind of stimulus, how often that happens, what your response is to that. Like this is kind of like the conditioning that maybe you're more familiar with, you know, like you ring a bell and give a dog a treat or whatever. I don't.
Yeah, Pavlov. Yeah.
It's been a long time. But this is like this is one aspect of our monkey brain that you can really lean into in terms of like how you tell your stories. And I'll get into that after I say what the second thing is. So the second thing is expectation and reward, right? So exposure and familiarity, expectation and reward. These two things are super important for how our brains learn to recognize certain stimuli and then how we respond to them. So when you're writing a story, you have to think about what aspects of this story are going to be really familiar to people, what aspects of it are not. And when you start defining those aspects of your story, then you'll understand like where do you need to focus your exposition? Where do you need to like maybe subvert certain tropes? Because based on, you know, if people have like a preconceived notion of something going into it, it's likely because they've been conditioned over an extended period of time, probably their whole life, to think about things a certain way or to see certain characters a certain way, or whatever. So if you're like, if you're writing anything, whether it's a character or a character arc or a plot device or a special object, like think about, is this something that people are familiar with? Is this something they're unfamiliar with? And for people that are doing really like in-depth world building as well, this is super, super important, because in fiction, you're I mean, either dealing with a context where it is basically our world, but with like different people, and you won't have to make, there's not that much of a cognitive leap that has to be performed by your readers in order to understand like what setting you're in. But if you're in any kind of fantasy setting, you have to think about like, you know, are these things that I need to do exposition on, or am I introducing some concept or a character that people are already going to be so familiar with that it will be almost detrimental if I don't subvert it? Because this is where the second part comes in. If people are really familiar with something or they're not familiar with something, their expectations will be measured accordingly. So if you, as an example, and I talk about this in, I did another video on tropes kind of in cognition where I talk about this a little bit more in depth, but in 85 Unseen, the magic system is called gathering. And it's sort of like my conception of what dark matter is. And there are two kinds of dark matter fragments that make up this system. And one is black and one is white. So it's Aether and Lux. And there are a lot of, there's so much media that uses black and white as a trope. It's as like a dualism trope where black represents the evil, bad, dark souls, and white is the pure light that vanquishes the darkness, right? So I deliberately introduced something into my story that people are very familiar with, because it's used so widely in like the fantasy genre, as a trope in magic systems. But if you introduce something that's familiar, you're not necessarily like at an advantage, because introducing something familiar also means that it has the potential to just like not be rewarding to people because they already know what to expect. And the way that our limbic system works is, if you aren't expecting a reward and you get one, your brain is like, nice. And if you aren't if you no okay if you aren't expecting a reward but you get one, that's great. If you are expecting a reward and you don't get one, brain does not like this. We don't like. So if you set up your story in a way that like you've introduced something that's really familiar to people and they already kind of know what to expect because you're not really doing anything interesting with the trope, they're not going to feel rewarded when whatever follow through happens, because you haven't considered how reward and expectation works. So there's that aspect. But then also, if you go into it with, you introduce something that's really unfamiliar, people won't necessarily know how to formulate their expectations to begin with, which means that whatever the payoff is for that will be lessened, because your readers aren't like immersed in whatever it is that you've decided to introduce. Yeah, so those are kind of the two things that I would pay the most attention to, and that I think you can benefit the most from paying attention to as a storyteller, even if you don't have a background in cognition, you're not interested in brains or anything. I think if you pay attention to how you structure familiarity in your story and how much exposure your audience has to different aspects of your story, your characters, and your world, that will benefit you greatly. And then tying into that, structuring how you set up those things, and then how they evolve over the course of the story to make it rewarding for your audience when you either fulfill expectations, or maybe disappoint them. So you have to, and there are so many ways that you can do that too. Sometimes fulfilling an expectation that people have is the fine way to go. Like if you have an enemies to lovers arc and you just do an enemies to lovers arc and that's exactly what it is, I love that. Because I love enemies to lovers arcs. You don't have to you don't have to subvert it. But I think if you're aware, I know this is like very very higher order storytelling.
Yeah, it's
stuff.
very meta.
I think if you're aware though of like, these how familiar people are with different elements in your story, and then what expectations you will set up and what expectations they might come in with around those things, and then how you can like structure your story arcs or your character arcs to make the experience of reading that whole thing really rewarding for your readers. And I tell my readers too, like, 85 Unseen is a long story. It's very long. And we're at 20 episodes at the time of recording this.
Mm-hmm.
And I have only just reached like the call to action. Like we have gone through, I mean, we've had our inciting incident and we're kind of dealing with the aftermath and stuff, right? But it's not like some webtoons are done in 20 episodes. Like
yeah.
But their journey is really is just beginning. So I tell people like, it is long. I mean, some of it's also because I had to cut my chapter length in half because I realized that I literally could not produce the length of chapters that I was producing on a weekly basis. But I the way that I frame it to people is like, you will be rewarded for following it through. And that's what people read stories for. It's like to be rewarded. That's what people want out of their entertainment. It's a feeling of satisfaction when they finish it. And satisfaction is like one of the biggest indicators of the experience of beauty or aesthetic appreciation. Scientists are always like measuring satisfaction, asking people if they felt satisfied when they watched this or listened to this or whatever, because that's kind of what people want out
Mm.
of their experience consuming any kind of media. They want to consume it and get some feeling of satisfaction. Where that feeling comes from is up to you to determine, but you have to tell your readers, you have to convince them early on, regardless of how long your story is. You have to do something early on in your story that convinces them to keep reading it, because they're only going to keep reading it if they feel like this is going to be something that they will be satisfied when they reach the end of that. And you can do that by, you know, introducing just the right amount of information. People need a little bit of mystery, but not too much. You know, introducing like characters that maybe people are already making predictions about what's going to happen to them or who they are or who they're going to get with. You know, that's interesting for people. And then when you set those things up, and then you either you know, destroy them, tear them down completely, or fulfill their expectations. Either way, you know, that's what can create a satisfying experience for your reader. So if you utilize those two aspects of cognition, exposure / familiarity, and two, expectation and reward, those, if you utilize those things, I guarantee you will be able to produce more satisfying stories for your readers. I hope that perspective helps.
Yeah. The example I like to bring up a lot is the remarried empress. So you jump into that and you learn how awful of a situation Navier is in, and you empathize with her. And then the whole story is just you waiting for that moment that they showed right at the beginning of the webtoon, where she satisfyingly gets the divorce and shows up her ex-husband.
Yeah, that is such a good example, because that's one of the many kind of like things that you can do to set up reader expectations. And like for me, I am a mysteries reader. Like I will keep reading because I want answers. And if a series introduces some ambiguity about like someone's identity, or like what, you know, what this character's intention is, or something early on, and if the story is interesting and stuff and they leave that unanswered, I will keep reading that until I get an answer. And even if even if I binge the whole thing and I still don't get the answer, that's how you get me as a long-term reader, because I will just keep reading it until I get my damn answers. And that's happened to me with multiple webtoons that I started reading when I was, you know, when I first like discovered the app. Like I just kept reading them because I just wanted to know that, even though they were like, you know, the most popular, not even that great like webtoons, but I'm still reading them because I still want to know what happens. That kills me. That's my weak thing. But yeah, you can do it with so many things. You can do it by introducing a scene from the end, and you know, just like teasing your readers with that, like Remarried Empress. So it's one of those things that can be done very individually according to your story, and that might be different depending on how long your story is. But if I think that the quality of storytelling is mature and I think the art is good, then I will probably keep reading like a decent amount of it before I actually decide if I'm gonna like. And I probably won't decide if I'm gonna read it long term. I'll just like stay subscribed until one day I get a notification that it updated, and then I'm like, I'm never gonna read this, and then I unsubscribe from it.
Yeah.
You know, but it's like a lot of readers aren't. They're not like that. They will literally like read the first 2 or 3 and then that's it. I think other comic creators are a little bit more forgiving in terms of like, yeah, we'll like read a bunch of the episodes and like subscribe, maybe come back to it later, see how much your art has progressed and, you know, whatever. But early on, I think there's a lot you can do in terms of playing with like those two things, familiarity and expectation, to help pull in those readers who aren't going to give it, a second chance, or won't really read past the second or third episode. So
Yeah, that's another really interesting topic too, like the mindset of of being a creator versus a reader. Like when you think about it, or maybe it's just the case for me, when I go in to read something as like a fan, I am looking at totally different things than if I have to read something as Brishella, the webtoon creator. Like, I have to read this for such and such video, or I have to read this to do research on what's popular, or I have to read this because, like, I just sort of like inherently know what I like as a reader, and I just go for stuff, and the stuff isn't always the brightest. Sometimes it's like admittedly kind of dumb, and I'm just satisfied with it. But then as an author, I'm like forgiving in some areas that normally as a reader I would totally not be forgiven in. And in other areas, I am like super duper harsh in areas that as a reader I wouldn't really care about, which is kind of weird.
no, I think that makes a lot of sense though. And I think I had to start like training myself to read things the way that like a regular reader would, because I just like don't read anything like that.
Mm.
I every piece of media that I consume, just because of the neuroaesthetics background, I can't even help it. Like everything that I consume, I'm thinking about like, how is this related to perception? And um, what does this mean about the origin of art in the human species? So I had to kind of train myself to like consume media with a reader's, or not just a reader, but like an average, it's like a regular audience perspective, because I approach everything with I'm interested in like, especially if I start something new and I know that it's popular, and I'm reading it to, or I'm watching it to get on the hype train because it seems like a lot of people are interested in this. I go into it thinking like, what is it about this story that's like capturing people's attention? And like,
Mm.
I'm trying to like analyze it. And I had to train myself to look at things more as like, how are your average audience members responding to this kind of thing? Because when I started doing 85 Unseen, I mean, I wrote it to be read as like a graphic novel, in which I read graphic novels in basically one sitting.
Yeah, same.
Especially if it's like a shorter edition, which is what the first season of mine is like, it's not all in like one massive thing. It's split up into seasons. And so I read those in like one sitting. So I kind of wrote it to be read in one sitting. And I realized very quickly, especially once I had to start trimming my episode length in half, that it was going to take me longer to get where I wanted than I thought it was, in terms of like setting up everything that need to be set up for this, huge epic to unfold, and making the intentions of the characters clear and all of that stuff. And I kind of wrote it to be more like consumed in like a one sitting with uh in a graphic novel. And I had to go back, and I ended up remastering my entire first episode, because I reached a point where I was like, you need to look at this from the perspective of just like your average reader who is gonna want to know the characters' intentions, and um, kind of like the basic setup of this world and the magic system and everything within the first few episodes. So I ended up like going back and kind of restructuring something. I didn't change any plot. I basically just took things that were going to be flashbacks and put them in the prologue.
Mm.
um, and tried to kind of cater it more toward the average reader on Webtoon, which is different than your average graphic novel reader who's reading it all in one sitting. And that's also different than your average, consumer of whatever other kind of media. So I learned a lot early on just about like, how you should control your pacing, and character reveals, and giving information about the plot while you're also doing exposition. And this is a very complicated web of things to have to deal with as well when you're doing a fantasy series, because you have to introduce your reader to all of these unfamiliar things that they are not going to be able to understand, and therefore will not be able to understand whatever stakes are associated with them until they understand what the thing is, like what the magic is, um or what are the consequences of it or something. So, you know, that was a thing that I thought that I had down when I initially wrote out all of the script for the first season, but then I ended up having to like kind of go back and make some tweaks because I realized that I was not treating it enough like a webtoon, and I was treating it more like a graphic novel. So I try actively to kind of like reapproach my media consumption like a reader would, because you kind of have to, and you'll gain things from looking at it like a creator and looking at it like a reader. But yeah, I mean, I'm not surprised though that you have like a Rochella approach to reading things, because I can only imagine, especially when you do content about, you know, like people submitting pitches and stuff, and I'm like, she must read so many webtoons.
Oh my gosh, yeah, yeah. Looping around, a big part of why I decided to reboot That Which Is My Sister is definitely realizing the weekly thing myself rather than just to decide to just keep going with it, you know? Because it's a whole different beast. I find myself actually reading a lot of webtoons that aren't on Webtoon because after all of this, I find it kind of stressful to read on Webtoon. So I actually read Webtoons on other apps more often now.
It's a pretty good strategy to to avoid the stress, because again, it's one of those things that comes by association. Like our brains learn to associate stress with certain activities or with, you know, certain social media platforms or something because of the work that we do around them. So I can definitely imagine that, you know, reading webtoons on like non-webtoons platforms like Tapas or something can kind of be helpful to just get you off of the thing. No, sometimes I see the little green icon on my phone and I'm like, get away from me. I don't need to see this stress anymore.
Tell us about your thoughts on social media's effects on us as a creator, as creators, not a singular massive creator.
Yeah, I think social media is, the problem with it is that it's in every content avenue, very oversaturated, and there's a lot of competition for people's attention, because the people who develop apps, like psychologists who are involved in the development of these things, have gotten so good at understanding what things people need in order to like continue clicking or stay on the page or whatever for just like one single droplet of serotonin, that it's like we're almost fighting against the apps. I know I am. I have to actively fight to not just keep scrolling on TikTok, because the algorithm knows now so well what I want to see, that it's is something that I have to actively fight against, to like not just mindlessly scroll on it for 5 hours. And it's melting my brain to do that. So I think the thing that's been the most detrimental for people, and for creators by extension, is just that we have a different relationship with media because of social media apps, and I guess and websites as well, but especially like mobile apps have really changed how we consume media and what we expect in terms of like quality of media, length of media, how often we get new media, how funny it is, how entertaining it is, how useful it is to us. And we can get so much of that now for free from so many different sources that it's really, I think it's detrimental for creators then, because we're expected to perform at the level of franchises that have way more like resources, money, whatever, employees than we do, and we're expected to be able to provide that same quality of content for free on a regular and consistent basis to people.
Yeah.
And doing that in exchange for, oh, well, you get to share your story on a platform, or oh, you get followers on your YouTube channel, or on whatever other, you know, social media platform that you're using. You get exposure, you know, like I mean, I think Webtoon is a great platform, and I'm obviously very grateful for it. And I wouldn't be using it if I didn't like it. But at the same time, you know, it's like creators don't owe anything to these platforms. And as grateful as I am to have a platform like Webtoons, where there is a big readership, a substantial one. Like Tapas doesn't really have a great readership on it. I have like 50 subscribers on Tapas. It's not even like a tenth of what I have on Webtoons, and I'm hugely grateful for that. But at the same time, it's like, you know, we're not beholden to these apps. Like creators don't owe them anything, and it's difficult to have to produce content in a world where you feel like you do owe these platforms something. Like I feel like I'm indebted to TikTok in a way, because a lot of my readership comes from there. But I'm not. But I feel like I am, because it basically gave me exposure in exchange for, you know, probably hundreds of hours of my free labor in making content, which keeps people on their app, which they then make money from. And I make basically nothing. So I think the difficulty with social media comes in just that it's really restructured the way that people consume media, and how our brains respond to those things. And by extension, it has kind of forced, I think, creators into a bit of a corner in terms of, you know, how much content we produce, how often we produce it, and how much we get compensated for it, and then leading us to feel like we're meant to be grateful for that exposure, as recompense for our many hours of free labor. So that's a whole other this is probably the one thing that I rant the most about to like my real life friends, and they're like, please not another rant about like media consumption and late stage capitalism. Especially, you know, it's one of those things. I think other Webtoons creators and even readers to an extent like understand like just how many comics are on that platform, and I have so many thoughts.
Yeah.
Those are a few of them though, but yeah, I think those are probably the worst effects that it's had on creators.
Webtoon's like a whole like internal conflict in and of itself, because like you want sites like Webtoon or Tapas to notice you because that's going to get you more readers, or you might get a contract with them and be able to actually get money. But like at the same time too, the culture around us having to be like grateful for them beyond the actual opportunities that they're giving the vast majority of us is kind of like crazy too. Because that's definitely something I noticed with Webtoon Tea or some videos on my channel. Like, I think things have been changing recently, but like, it used to be I would criticize the smallest thing about Webtoon, and you get like a lot of pushback because it's sort of like, you should be grateful for the mere opportunity to post on the site that basically anyone can post on as long as they don't break terms of service. Because there's definitely a culture behind it, and there's definitely like a personality side to it. Because like I'm like that with other things in real life too. Like if someone does something small for me, maybe I'll feel a little bit grateful in return. But just as someone who's sort of like introverted and I'm not like super duper high on the empathy scale, I don't find myself feeling as grateful as I think some other people do, if that makes sense.
Oh, it absolutely does. And I think that's kind of my mindset, honestly, with Webtoon, with literally anything else. I mean, even thinking about like my university, right? And how I had all these great opportunities through that and will reap the benefit of coming from like a top 10 university my entire life. And being able to do like my neuroesthetics major obviously opened a lot of doors for me. But does that mean that I shouldn't be critical about how the university handles, so many things, which I was very vocally critical of throughout undergrad, and as many people were talking about systemic racism in academic institutions, talking about mental health, like, just a myriad of things. And I think people, their gut reaction is to be like, well, how can you say anything when you're, benefiting from the institution? And someone commented this on one of my videos. Actually, it was kind of an incoherent comment. It was literally like a novel that they had left. I think they deleted the comment, but it was on a video about consumption and capitalism and being a small creator. And someone commented that I can't. I said in the caption of the video, y'all, we are not thriving. And they said, not thriving? You are thriving. You have a YouTube channel with 400 subscribers and a video with 200 views. And I was like, ma'am,
gosh,
are you listening to what we're saying? This video has 200 views. No, but she was like basically saying that I can't critique society because I don't live in like an impoverished country where I'm actively being persecuted by the government and like, I don't know, like scavenging for food or something, which is not true. You can criticize society and governments, whatever you want. Even if you have a modicum of privilege, you are allowed to have commentary on things. And I think that's the issue with like the Webtoons discussions, is that people think like, oh, but it's given you so many benefits and opportunities for you to share your story and have all these readers that you wouldn't have otherwise. And it's like, yes, but that doesn't mean that we're not allowed to like critique the larger structure that it's part of, which, let's be real, there's a very important discussion with Webtoons and other comic platforms and also like Wattpad and similar kind of creative platforms, as far as being like IP factories and how much
I gotta show you.
Yeah, there is a very worthwhile discussion to be had about Webtoons and other comic or creative sites like Wattpad, and how they handle people's intellectual property, and to some extent exploit those things for profit. And I think people like to shut down those kinds of conversations because it also, it's not a fun thing to confront that you're actively, benefiting from something that is in a lot of ways also detrimental to a larger group of people, or that it's like, because if we all just took our comics off Webtoons canvas and said, we need to fix these things, and no one's coming back, like literally had a strike, maybe something would change. But we're not really in a position where we can all do that. And so I think people feel bad that they know there are problems with the platform and that there's not really they don't feel they have any power to fix those things in the first place. So it's just easier to like reprimand people for complaining about little things, even though I think that that's the only way that those platforms will improve. And I can guarantee you that a lot of the improvement we've seen from Webtoon Canvas in the last couple months, like they've announced, they're trying to fix the rating system after all of these creators took issue with being rate bombed. And then there was the more recent announcement about what was it? Oh, they're expanding the ad revenue program or whatever. So your monthly page views be only from the US. But I guarantee you those things, they were, you think they were just going to do those things randomly if people didn't ask? Like, no, corporations are always going to operate for the benefit of themselves. And if Webtoon Canvas creators were literally just silent and never said anything about what they wanted to improve on the platform or what complaints they had about the platform, do you think that Daddy Webtoon was going to be like, oh, yes, we should generously expand the page views to be outside the US so that we can give them more money? Like, no, they would have. So not that not to villainize Webtoon Canvas either. I know that they're working with like a very small staff, but I think it's important. It's healthy for people to be critical of the platforms, because that's really the only power that we have. We're unfortunately positioned most times as independent creators to basically, just use whatever we have available to us and to promote in whatever ways we have. And the only power that we have is to occasionally voice concerns or be critical or offer suggestions for improvement. So I think people should be receptive to those things.
Yeah. The weird thing too about the suppression thing is when you think about it, right now we have some of the most power over the site that we'll ever have, because Webtoon is like a thing, but it's not like a thing yet. So it's not like YouTube where they can afford to just not listen to us because other people will just, like,
for sure.
Yeah. And the other thing is too, like, right now Webtoon, this is speculation, people. Right now Webtoon doesn't have to be super profitable or questionably profitable at all, because they have their parent company who is feeding them money, because they are looking at this not as a short-term investment but a long-term one. So they are willing to do all kinds of stuff to be able to set up this long-term investment to be able to get a foothold, particularly in the US.
Yeah, and I think that foothold too, and especially like the IP factory related concerns with Webtoon is what the long-term investment is in, because the stronger foothold that they have and the more legitimate of a presence they have in the US, the more they will be able to like outsource or sell their content to Hollywood and have things adapted and make even more money by reusing the same content in different mediums, which is, our favorite way of producing media now, is to just rewrite things that already exist and put them in a different format. So there's like there are so many ways that they can branch out and expand what they're doing, and I think that's probably why they bought Wattpad as well. So it's just the beginning. It's just the beginning. But you're right that we do have probably more power as creators on Canvas than we will in the future. And I will be curious to see what direction they go in with Canvas in the future, because I don't think that it's profitable to Canvas to have, or it's not profitable to Webtoons to have Canvas. Not really in the long run by far, because their money comes from like fast passes and the coins, which you can't use on Canvas series really, except the really large ones now that allow you to unlock episodes by watching ads.
And it's not like they run ads against the series that aren't available for ad revenue like some other sites do either. So they're just sort of like there. Yeah,
they're just there. And I don't see Webtoons really. That's the sad thing, is I don't really see Webtoons as a corporation wanting to invest more money into Webtoon Canvas, because I mean, of course I want them to, but I struggle even with the current format where only the like top 1%, like less than, of Webtoon Canvas comics actually bring in revenue to Webtoons at all through the
It's still
ads.
probably not profitable.
Yeah, it's like I can't in that current model, I can't see Webtoon Canvas really being so profitable that they're going to invest, more money in hiring staff for Webtoon Canvas or anything like that, which is a shame. I mean, I want to believe that they will expand it and that they'll hire more people, because I feel like so many of their problems would be fixed if they hired more people. But
Yeah.
I don't know if this might be the peak amount of people that they ever have really like dedicated to Webtoon Canvas, unless they change how Webtoon Canvas functions to be more profitable. They're basically just running like a charity at some point, which is why it's hard to feel critical of it, because it's like
well, I mean, they get a lot of stuff from Canvas that I think they
get
just
so
don't
much,
use. Like, if
they get so much free promo.
if they wanted to, besides the pre-promo, think about the data.
Oh,
if
yeah.
they actually put together a nice tech team, they could use all of these free content to do an insane amount of research on what works well. And I doubt they're doing that. The other thing is, too, the amount of money it takes to greenlight someone. We don't know the cost behind that, but it might be equal. It might be equal or more than the amount it takes to run Canvas, the amount that they spend in developing new series that don't actually go through, or they might greenlight and they turn out to not really get that much readers. Like, the information is what is giving them, no, not is what is giving them, but is what could give them so much power in the future if they actually put their minds towards using it, since this is a long-term goal. Like, this is it's
yes.
extraordinarily valuable if they would just put resources towards it.
Yeah, I mean, their revenue, I feel like, really, they could be getting so much more if they were collecting data on things. And Webtoons doesn't have an algorithm, so they're really underutilizing how much time their users spend interacting with their content, because they could definitely be getting so much information from that. But instead, all of it comes from the ads and the coins and stuff, which, in the way that the site currently functions, I don't think that, unless they introduce like actual I don't know, an algorithm or something to measure how much time people spend reading certain comics or interacting with certain genres, or certain kinds of webtoons or whatever. They could, they're really, there's not a lot there for Canvas in terms of being profitable. It's free real estate. And it's not being utilized. Maybe they'll see that in the future, though. Anyway, I guess that's this is an abbreviated form of a discussion we will probably have later about the future of Webtoon Canvas.
Yeah. So thank you so much for coming. Just a reminder for everyone, there will be a part 2 where we discuss thoughts about Webtoon in general, as well as interesting topics like writing and world building. So be sure to look for that if it's in the future and it's already out. I don't know. Yeah, thank you for coming.
And we'll see you in the next interview.
Yeah. Everyone, be sure to check out 85 Unseen. Do you want to say where we can find you?
Yeah, sure. I'm here on YouTube, as well as TikTok and Instagram, kind of where I'm most active, which you can find in the description.
See you guys.
See you.